Welcome to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where we explore how behavior shapes leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Esther Bob, and this episode is brought to you by Esther C. Bob ABA Services. Today, I'm joined by Yatta, licensed behavior consultant. Her journey from navigating motherhood while pursuing her professional calling to becoming a compassionate, data-driven practitioner offers lessons about purposeful leadership and human behavior. Let's dive in. So Yatta, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I'm so happy to chat with you, and I'm excited to discover what I'm going to learn from our conversation today. So I always like to start off the conversations with asking my guests how they're feeling. So how are you feeling coming into today's conversation, Yatta?
Well, I'm feeling grounded and grateful. Basically, any opportunity for me to talk about, what I do, it felt energizing for me. So I'm excited, to be here to share and reflect. And hopefully, your listener can learn, from my journey in the field.
I love that. I heard grounded, I heard grateful, I heard reflective. And I've been listening to an audiobook recently, and it's talking a lot about being grateful and gratitude, right? Mm-hmm. And how that really supports us. But just as professionals, I feel as humans also, Yatta, just always reflecting on whether it's the day, whether it's the moment, what went well, what lessons we can learn, any of those things. So I think that's a good way. Take my deep breaths to start our conversation. I love all of that, Yatta. So thank you so much for sharing that. But before we dive in, Yatta, I just want to take a moment to pause. I want to say that, I've really had the privilege of supervising you at our previous employer. So that's where we met. And, I always say everyone comes into our lives for a reason. Mm-hmm. And then, we then formed that relationship, and then, it's been like friendship, but mentorship and all of those things at the same time. Mm-hmm. I've really watched you grow, Yatta, as a practitioner, as a leader, as a mother even, right? And it's been an extraordinary journey. You really show up to everything that you do, Yatta, with your heart, with your passion, with your compassion, and you show that you trust what you do, you trust the process, you trust your clients, you trust your families, but then also in the process, really caring about those that you serve, those that you provide services to, and really lifting up, the people around you. I can say just from my professional relationship with you, but now like more personal, like I said, because we've remained friends outside of work and still colleagues, just like lifting people up. And then also watching you, I say this to you all the time, not every single day, but, watching you being a mother and the way that you embrace, motherhood, and the way that you raise your son, it's really been amazing to look at. And then, you really do everything you do with integrity, with faith. You're really, grounded in your faith. You stay true to your values, to who you are. And I always say it's easier to be who we are than someone else. And so you're really good at being that. And then you always keep reaching towards the next thing, right? Towards all of those things that are possible for you, your son, your family, and your life. So I just wanted to share that with you, Yatta. Share that as an affirmation, but keep trusting your voice. Keep believing in yourself. Keep encouraging your son and others to do the same. Keep leading with that clarity and compassion that you've been leading with. And I just want to say that, it's really been an honor. And it's just a lot of pride, again, to witness your journey and to have you as someone important in my life. So I wanted to share that with you before we dive into the conversation.
Yes, I appreciate all those kind words. I've learned a lot from you too, professionally and even on a personal level. So I'm grateful. Like you said, things happen for a reason. We came into each other's lives for a reason, and I'm grateful every day. Yeah. I'm really grateful for what you have done for me, for my son, personally and professionally. It's a blessing to know that, I can always call on you. I can text you in the middle of the night and be like, hey, I don't understand X, Y, Z. Can you explain it? And you always explain it. You don't make me feel like, less of a person. You're always patient. And I always ask you, like, where have you been? Like, who are you? You know, because it's hard in this field for us to meet, you know, somebody like you that is really like grounded, somebody who's
Yeah.
always willing to assist, somebody who's willing to go the extra mile. You know, I mean, I can go on and on, you know,
Yeah.
based on the things that you have done for me and my son. So I'm grateful, you know. So I really look forward to this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yasa. I appreciate that. So now all about you, all about Yasa. So
Yes.
for the listeners who might be new to you, new to your work, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and, you know, your current focus professionally?
Yes. So currently I'm a behavior consultant, you know, basically specialized in a data-driven, you know, assessment, individualized treatment planning, you know, collaborative coaching across the home, the school, as well as the community setting. So basically my work is centered on empowering, you know, the children, the family, as well as the team, through evidence-based practices, you know, and applied behavior analysis. Um, you know, I lead with patience, compassion, you know, making sure that I'm always there for my team. Right now, my focus is basically on the system of care. So helping team building, you know, building that consistency as well as confidence so that that way they're able to serve the individual, the right way.
Wonderful. I love that. And are you having fun and joy
Oh, I'm
doing
having
that?
fun. Yes. Every time when I graph those data and I'm seeing like trend lines going up for, you know, things that I want to increase and things that I want to decrease, you know, it's exciting, you know. I'm definitely
Wonderful.
having fun.
Awesome. So what led you, Yats, I'm curious, to behavior consultation to begin with?
I would definitely say the science,
Mm,
the humility, as well as, you know, the collaboration.
yeah.
I also love the analytic side of it, you know, so digging into data, you know, identifying, you know, patterns, as well as designing interventions, you know. Um, I'm equally motivated by, you know, the rational side as well, being
Yeah.
able to coach, to model, empower caregivers and staff, and also create that meaningful change that keeps us committed to this, you know, to the field. So bringing change in the lives of, you know, family, you know, the things that we take for granted, you know.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes I know, you know, I always have a conversation with my son and I always tell him, like, you have no idea, like, how lucky you are. You know, there are kids out there, they cannot even communicate. You know, they can't even tell their parents what they want, but you have the ability to do that. So the fact that I'm able to even teach a kid or a parent how they can interact with their child, you know, that brings me joy.
That's really wonderful to share. And like bringing your son into the conversation, um, you know, just shows your compassion, your care in what you do. We're on the same journey. You're on a journey going somewhere. Your son is on a journey going somewhere, and those that you serve are on a journey going somewhere. And so you talked about the science, you talked about the data. Yes, absolutely. And, you know, those are some of the things that drew me to the field as well. I think also for me, it's just the fact that I always say to people, it's in our everyday lives, right? The things
Yeah.
that we talk about, the science, it's in
Hmm.
our everyday lives, but the relationships, yeah, that we form, I think, you know, those that's the part to me of this field. So again, like I'm saying, we met, you know, in the field and
Yeah.
formed this relationship, and even with our students, with our clients, so whomever the people are that we serve,
Hmm.
those are the things that move us, yet, right? So
Yes.
so yeah, I want to see that trend line going up,
Hmm.
and that makes me happy. I want to be able to collect the data and I want to be able to share it. But the relationships you form, you know,
Hmm.
I think it's one of the part that really keeps us in the field, keeps us grounded in the field, keeps us motivated. And just as you're saying, you're able to help someone be able to communicate, or, you know, whatever that change is that the client or the parent or whomever it is looking for. Um, I think those are the things that really mold us and encourage us and motivate us and keep us
Hmm.
going on. Because, you know, Yata, in the field, it has a bad rep. And if you're outside of the field, it may appear that, you know, it's not a good science, but it is. And the other reason we know it is, Yata, because it's just part of our own lives without us, you know, even thinking about all the basic concepts. So thank you for sharing that. That really resonates with me because I love the science, but I just love, you know, all of the other things that come with this,
Yeah.
and the relationships we're able to form, the people we're able to meet.
Hmm.
Yeah. So in all of that, Yatta, the whole premise of the podcast and the blog is just the fact that, and it's something I'm pushing at work too, is that everyone's a leader, right? Yeah. So oftentimes you might hear people think of, oh, they're the leaders, at this particular job. And that's not my view. I think people are leaders, at different levels. So they may be administrative leaders, right? But there are each staff or each person in his or her own right is a leader in what they do, or could be a leader, could be molded, and groomed into being a leader. So from your perspective, Yatta, as a behavior consultant, as someone who has been in the field and thinking of your role, how would you define leadership what's your view or your take on leadership in the context of behavior consultation?
Well, leadership in behavior consulting is about modeling integrity, compassion, and clarity. It's guiding team through challenges with steadiness, using data to make informed decisions, and creating an environment where everybody feels capable and as well as, supported. Leadership is not about having all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
It's about helping others build the skill and confidence that they need to navigate complex situations with consistency and clarity.
Mm-hmm.
You're not always going to know what to do, and it's okay for you to mess up to learn. You learn from your mistakes. As a leader, you don't always know it all.
Yeah.
You have to learn from other people around you. Once you're able to lead with integrity and your team feels like they can trust you, then you'll be able to navigate any complex situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, Yatta, especially when you said, because I'm really big on that. We all make mistakes. We're not perfect.
Yeah.
But I always say, the message I always share, I'm not the only person who says it, Yatta, is, mistakes are our best teachers. And I feel like mistakes shape us, right? If we never engage in that mistake, we wouldn't learn what we learned, the lesson we learned from it. I feel like they're our greatest lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And so I truly appreciate that is, as a leader, being able to recognize that those we lead are not perfect. They can make mistakes, but how can we help support them, right? So they always walk away with a lesson. And then same for us, like we're not perfect. We can make mistakes too.
Right.
So I appreciate that. And then you also talked about like seeing that everyone has a skill, has an ability, right? And shaping and grooming. But I think what I heard you say, from what I can draw from what you said, is just the concepts, which is something I also really promote, is bringing out the best in others, right? So helping people, sometimes it's, for me, I feel like even in our conversations or relationship, helping people realize this is a skill you have, or probably they didn't see, they didn't know it, but then helping them just continue to grow continuously. Just so they can essentially have to be the best version of themselves. Obviously, the person has to want that thing, right? And have that motivation. Now, we can also have that relationship with them as a leader where we're able to help them move from a state of not wanting to pursue to, I've listened, you've coached, you've groomed, and so now I can see the value in what you're saying. So I think your approach, your view on leadership makes sense to me. And I think also it promotes psychological safety, right? So I feel safe with this person. They trust me. They believe in me. They're supporting me. And I think, when we have all of those things, as leaders, as professionals, as individuals, then it fuels, change. Like, people do want to make changes. They want to improve. They want to, move from where they are to where they could be.
Yes.
Yeah. What is, so as you think of your journey, if you think back to years ago when, you were new to the field, whether it's your college years, whatever, what is a leadership lesson that you would say you learned early on in life or early on in your career, that stays with you today, that you continue to practice despite it, being one that you've learned years ago?
That's a great question. One thing definitely that I learned early in this field is that people don't always follow the data, they follow trust. They can have, basically you can have like the most beautiful graph behavioral trend in the world. But if team members don't feel seen, heard, or respected, they are not going to even listen to what you have to say. So building a rapport for me it's basically everything. It makes everything possible. Once people are able to trust you, then you are able to sell whatever it is that you want to sell to them.
Yeah.
But if they can trust you, there's no way, their relationship is going to work.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you have a trend line that's going up. If a caregiver doesn't trust you as a person, they're not even going to listen to you. So
Yeah.
I think that for me, I learned at a very early stage in this field that trust is the most important thing, regardless. That you can even bring nonsense and sell it to somebody, but if they trust you, they're going to believe you. Yeah. It's just like, me having a great relationship with you. You can, because I trust you.
Yeah.
Even if you're telling me something that I may not agree with, but because I trust you, I'm like, oh, okay, I trust her. I don't think she's going to tell me, the wrong thing or whatnot, But once caregivers feel like they don't trust you, like that's right there. It's a huge barrier. So for me, I've definitely learned that trust is important in this field. With the, the team members, the caregivers, as well as the students that we're serving.
Yeah. I love that. Yes. I mean, that is such a fundamental concept that you mentioned, trust, because just as you said it, you've articulated it and explained it. So I don't think there's anything I need to add, but it really, to me, is the foundation of any relationship, right? And then to me, we just talked about safety and psychological safety. When someone trusts you, like you said, you feel safe. And then, all right, yeah, so now let's talk about the data, let's talk about the science, all of that stuff, but I trust that you are here in my best interests. Okay. I trust that you are here to represent me. I trust that you are here to represent my child. I trust that you really, truly do care and are concerned about the well-being of my child or whomever the client is. Yeah. So I think it's so important. And that's why I say, ABA is more than just as you're saying, Yatta, the data. And I think if we look at even the most recent version of, the most recent edition of what we call the ABA Bible, right? Cooper, and articles and research, you see a lot more about, compassionate care, right? Compassionate practice. And to be compassionate means we are willing to develop, trusting relationships and ensure that, people have our trust. And so there are different things and different strategies and different tools that we use to build that trust and develop that trust, because we have to earn it, right, Yatta?
Right. Yeah.
So having said all of that, it's such a great segue into my next question for you. So how do you, this trust that you're talking about, Yatta, how do you build trust? How do you build rapport? It actually was one of the interview questions, actually, at a former job, to be honest, when I was interviewing people. How do you build trust? How do you build rapport with students, with families, but then Yatta, also with colleagues?
For me, I start by listening. I want to be able to understand each person's perspective, their strengths, their concern before offering solutions. Sometimes we're too quick to jump into giving, solutions without listening. So I believe that listening first is the most important thing. I use a clear person-centered language and make sure their recommendation feels doable and that they're not overwhelming. With students, definitely I focus on building that connection with them. With adults, I try to focus on collaboration as well as transparency, because transparency is very important in this field. So trust grow when people feel valued as well as when they're included, Sometimes as behavior specialists, like we tend not to be as transparent as we should be with our the caregivers. So I feel like, making sure that there's a transparency with your interaction with them, that can also help to build a better relationship with them.
Yeah. I heard you say listening, Yatta, and then I heard inclusion. Those are, you said a lot, but like two that really stands out to me is the listening and the inclusion. The listening, because every single episode I've done so far, Yatta, that has been one word that has come up. It's been consistent across, like literally if I was doing research, like, yeah, there's lots of data supporting that whole function of listening, the role it plays, the importance. And that's how we build trust.
Yeah.
It's like listening, pausing, right, to hear what the person is saying.
All right.
Listening to respond as opposed to listening to react, listening to hear, right, as opposed to listening to respond. So really pausing and being present. So that's something, the listening part is not necessarily something I'm working on, but just the ability to be present. Because we have so much going on in our lives, and we could be in a meeting or whatever it is, or someone could be talking to us and our mind will just drift off, right? But to listen, to me, just as you said, we have to be fully present, right? We have to give this person our undivided attention. And to me, I believe that's one of the foundational principles for building trust is just listening, giving your undivided attention, right? Paying attention, active listening, right? Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. And, inclusion, to me, it's another core factor that contributes to trust, because you've mentioned inclusion, and what came to mind when you said that to me is the high level or the high rate of suspensions and expulsions that we see from preschools, right? Through school age. And, we talk a lot about the prison, the school to prison pipeline, but then I just say the preschool to prison pipeline, because kids, in preschools are being suspended and expelled. And it made me think of that, yes, because you used the word inclusion. When preschools or schools are suspending or expelling kiddos, they're literally excluding them. And so how did the students then develop trust in the school? How did the parents develop trust? Even if the child was suspended and they went back the next day, that trust is broken, right? It might not be 100% broken, but to some extent it's impacted. Yes. And so even us as professionals, making sure that if we're going to provide a therapeutic session to a child, that our goal should be to push in. So meet that child in the classroom where the child's at. Now, if the child really needs to be receive that instruction or that therapy, in a one-to-one setting, then that's fine. That's what the child needs. But the goal should always to start there. And I think, just the child or the person being included. I mean, just as you mentioned, you also mentioned the word transparency, Yatta. And I think even, working in organizations, the more we can be transparent. Now, obviously there are some things, policies are being worked on, things like that needs to remain confidential until it's released. But some level of transparency, like, okay, we're working on this, we'll release the information once we have it. But I can't tell you, how much that builds trust. But then also I think of even now, like evaluation season, like meeting with staff, even today, like I'm giving my feedback from the observation what I saw them do, but then I'm still asking them, so what are your thoughts, right? All of those things build trust to me, because yes, I'm saying this is what I see. This is where what I think are your strong areas. This is what I think are your areas for growth. But then also, what are your thoughts? What do you think? So, I think for me, what stood out is the listening, the inclusion, and then I also heard you mention transparency. So thank you for sharing that. So then you also, Yatta, a buzzword that keeps coming up in our conversation tonight is compassion, right? To me, I say it all the time, but you know this already. Compassion is big for me. Because at the end of the day, Yatta, we're all human, right? So I always leave with that. We're all human. We're all individuals. I was talking, to a staff member today and saying, like, when people complain or whatever it is, or even if it's something difficult going on in their lives, sometimes we don't take the time to think of how the impact that our conversation has on this person, right? The weights we're putting on them, things like that. And so we then have to be able to, what I said to the person today was, this is something I'm working on, is not taking on the weight of others on myself. I listen, but not making it impact me to the way where now I'm impacted emotionally. And I think it requires compassion from everyone to be able to see the other person's point of view, or how my behavior might be impacting, this person that I'm interacting with. So how do you then lead, to thinking of all of that? And, the need to be compassionate, but especially since in ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, now we talk a lot about compassionate care. How do you lead with compassion? So when you think about you're dealing with students, some with challenging behaviors, right? Teachers, you're dealing with families, you're dealing with colleagues. And not only that, so you're dealing with like a diverse staff, diverse students, but then diverse families, like, you know what I'm saying? So it's just so many variables that you're dealing with. How do you lead with compassion with all of that?
Well, definitely. I mean, I've come to understand that, like, compassionate leadership means, acknowledging that behavior change impact people, well, everyone differently. I try to normalize the emotional side of the work, the frustration, the fatigue, the uncertainty, and then pair that with empathy, with, concrete, actionable, support. I try to use like the calm model, trying to break interventions into a manageable steps for our, caregivers as well as the behavioral techs. Try to celebrate progress, right? Because sometimes we're so focused on, we want to see the big progress, but try not to celebrate those little progress that that the team is making, or even the individual that we're serving is making. So I try to make them understand that no matter how small something is a progress. Like, we need to celebrate that. I try to make them understand that I'm here to support.
Mm.
I'm not here to bark orders to tell you you're not doing X, Y, and Z correctly. So when your behavioral technicians, if they feel like, they're being supported, it helps.
Yeah. Um, support, yeah, support goes a big way.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of how we live with compassion. But one thing that I'm taking away from what you said is you mentioned incremental progress, right? To that
Yes.
extent. And it
Mm-hmm.
makes me think of, so Carter, his change model, he talked, I think it was step 6. It's an 8-step change model, but it's celebrating small wins,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like the different points on the graph, celebrating those small wins. So we have this great lofty goal, but at least I can see you're getting there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
let's celebrate that. It's like a child saying the first word, or a child making the first sentence, or whatever, making the first step. The child sitting for 2 seconds, right? It's 2 seconds greater than 0. So those small wins, I think, that's definitely one of the ways, yeah, so that we lead with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know this is where you're trying to go. And sometimes people take steps back, and that's okay, Yatta, as long as they
Yeah.
remain focused on the goal, right? That's true for any of us in life. We all have hiccups, we have barriers, we might take 5 steps forward, and then something happens
Mm-hmm.
and we're now 3 steps backward. But just being there, as you said, and you also mentioned, I'm here to support. I'm not here
Mm-hmm.
to judge. I'm not here to push perfection. I'm here to support you along your journey. And I
Yes.
absolutely think, as leaders, um, there's a whole analytic side of it, but this compassionate, just humanistic side,
Yeah.
is what is, just what really stands out to me. Just being able to celebrate and encourage and support people, as you said. And you said this from the beginning, like, building those relationships,
Mm-hmm.
um, focusing on that trust. We want the data, we want the science, obviously, but that once you have that, then yes, people then feel supported,
Correct.
and then want to follow through with your suggestions and recommendations. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm enjoying this conversation so far, Yasa. So let's talk a little bit about, let's kind of just shift a little bit about things, concepts like equity and culture and diversity and things like that. So I'm from a diverse background, so are you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And culture is big to me. Culture is big to you. And then it's the same for, right, those that we serve. They have their background, their ethnicities, their cultures, their beliefs, their norms. So how do you honor that culture, Yatta, in your consulting work? How do you honor the diversity? How do you honor diverse perspectives, different beliefs, things like that? How do you approach that?
Well, for me, I try to approach every case with cultural humility. That means, asking questions, not, making assumptions. Try to avoid those assumptions. And recognizing that behavior is always shaped by context, like family values, community norms, communication style, and the way in which people live. I try to co-create interventions that respect, identity, language, as well as cultural practice. because we all know when families feel like they are being honored, they're being included in
Yeah.
the process, intervention will become more meaningful.
Hmm.
I don't try to force my beliefs on people. I always look at it like, okay, what will work for an African kid when I work for, let's say a Jamaican kid, right?
Yeah.
Or what
Yeah.
will work for a black boy mean I work for a white kid. So I
Yeah.
always try like to look at it from cultural standpoint, like how, even the communication style, like the way in which us black people, we communicate with our children is
Yes.
different,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes like I try, even when I'm training my BHTs, I will try to tell them like, look, there is a difference between a verbal abuse and being firm when you're giving directives, right?
Yeah.
So you always need to know, like, different cultural backgrounds, the cultures that you're interacting with. And we all know in the field, they say if you don't have, experience in dealing with certain culture, or you don't have, the training, you should go ahead and seek that training. So if I'm with let's say, a family that I have no idea how to deal with them, like I'll try to do research.
Yeah.
So that way, like I'm not going in with a bias. I'm not going in with any assumptions like, okay, these people are that way. So I focus on, the cultural humility part, so that way I am delivering the best service that I can to the parent that I'm assigned to.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all of that. Yeah, I mean, you started off with cultural humility, and that is so important. And it's a shift again in research and literature in the approach, because yesteryear it was cultural competence. Like, we need to be competent. We need to have all this
Yes.
knowledge about all these different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
which is very unrealistic, right? The
Yeah.
approach that you mentioned, cultural humility, just like you said, is just being open to learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Avoiding assumptions, asking questions. So, as you mentioned, doing research, finding out about those different cultures, but oftentimes just part of that is asking them the questions themselves, right? So
Mm-hmm.
getting to know it. And, it made me think of, as I was listening to you speak on culture and diversity, the concept of a tabula rasa, so wiping the slate clean. So from one
Mm-hmm.
family to another family, going with a fresh
Yes.
mind, clean slate,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
This family is this family. I am who I
Yes.
am. That child is
Mm-hmm.
that child.
Mm-hmm.
This is right. This is family A. That's family B. So let me learn. Let me just be open to asking questions. And, I think, Yatta, that's true for whether it's a relationship with the family, building that partnership, whether it's, even with our children, yes, like we're all
Mm-hmm.
different, yes. So like really getting to know our children as they grow and having conversations with them, or the colleagues that we work with,
Yes.
tell me
Mm-hmm.
something about you, your culture, your background, whatever, what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your interests outside of work, things like that. Um, but to me, it goes back to, like you said in the beginning, yeah. So that's why I'm like, the themes are there, as we continue the conversation. It's like building that trust.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the ways we get to build that trust, is when we just have this approach where we recognize that everyone's not the same. Different cultures, different upbringings, different beliefs, Yatta.
Yes.
Based on where we were born, we have different beliefs and different things that we hold true to us. Other
Yes.
people who were born different places might not have the same beliefs, but their beliefs are part of what makes them who they are. So
Correct.
respecting that and honoring it. And I think what also stood out to me in what you said is avoiding assumptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all know what that means. We hear the phrase all the time, but we
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure we're asking, right? And
Right.
really asking with curiosity, Yatta, not with a preconceived, oh, this is what they're going to say, but
Mm-hmm.
just really asking honestly and being willing to understand and accept their response, and then saying understand. But if whatever they're saying is not clear to us and we need some more clarity, just being open to saying, okay, can you help me understand a bit more, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important in our work for those that we serve, but also for ourselves too. um,
Yes.
because it moves us away from the idea that we're going to assume, and we're more likely to just ask the questions and allow them to share the information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's always big on like helping others grow, helping them move from where they are to where they could be. So on that note, as a behavior consultant, right, who has worked in the field, obviously moving up from your position before to now your position as a behavior consultant, what advice would you give to them, yeah, to those who are coming into the field new, but really when you think of this question, thinking of more along the lines of work-life balance, avoiding
Mm-hmm.
burnouts. We
Yeah.
all know, yeah, so I know, others listening, in the field know what working in this field comes with, right? So
Yeah.
whether it's more on the consultative side or whether it's more on the instructional side, it really doesn't matter. It involves so many different layered relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes people come to you with things, but they're not thinking of what could be the impact on this person, right? How might it impact them? So how do you balance work and life, and how do you avoid burnout?
Um, well, I try when I need to take off, I will take off. Like I
Okay.
try to do some self-care. I try to go to the gym. I try not to bring work home
Mm,
unless if I'm working from home.
okay.
I remember when I first started, like every session, that I conducted, I'll bring the note home to complete it. And
Yeah.
one day I just said to myself, I'm like, you need to stop, complete your session at the site and then come home. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to bring work home if you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all know we're in a field where it's not always the case. You'll
Yeah.
go in and you'll have, you'll run your session and things will happen. So that can prevent you from getting your work done, during that time. But I'll definitely say not bringing work home and taking care of myself when needed,
Yeah.
and definitely having a trusted person that I can talk to. For example, you, when I'm going through maybe a
Yeah.
hectic day, I can call you and be like, hey, I need a vent. So
Yeah.
just making sure that I can collaborate with other people, have mentorship, that kind of like helps me in the field because there's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things going on that sometimes, we may miss, but making sure
Yeah.
that you have somebody that you can rely on, that actually have your back. I feel
Yeah.
like for me, it's been the greatest blessing for me, and just taking time for myself when I need, when I have to.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, this topic, this question, this concept is just something that's important to me because, like, we know we've worked together and we know the situations and conditions, that we were faced with, in that setting. And, I think, honestly, as you said, everything in life happens for a reason. People come
Hmm.
into our lives for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think I value every experience I've had in life, Yatta, because I've learned something from it, number one. But then, it also helps shape me into who I am and then help me continue to make progress. So I can
Hmm.
say to you from like previous jobs, the one thing that I learned and took away is what you're saying in terms of that work-life balance. But also at the end of the day, Yatta, we have to take care of ourselves, right? We
Yeah.
always have to put ourselves number one. It's not like we're saying we're better than someone else. That's not the point. It's like if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of anybody else, right?
Hmm.
If we're not pouring into our cup, the episode I released today, then eventually we wouldn't have anything else left to give ourselves or anyone. So I think it's so important. But I think it's so important, Yasa, that we normalize resting, that we
Yes.
normalize taking a break, that we
Yeah.
normalize stepping away from the desk, whether it's to
Hmm.
just take a walk, whether it's to sit in a car, it doesn't really matter. But
Yes.
make that something that's normal, that people aren't saying, oh, you take a lunch break. Oh yeah, I do. Right. Because I, at
Hmm.
the end of the day, I have to take care of myself. And I think also, yes, it makes me think of setting boundaries and buffers
Hmm. Yes.
so that we're not overreaching, we're not overextending ourselves. So if someone comes to you with a task that it's not something that's really assigned to you, obviously, in work, we're here to support each other, but we want to be able to establish that and make it clear so then we do not become overburdened. Um, I had a conversation along that line where recently, in terms of, the lead on a case and making sure that person is really leading the case and not necessarily expecting someone else to do it, but then us being able to speak up, right? Respectfully. So,
Hmm.
because sometimes people are not aware, or maybe they are. I remember this was, I don't know, yeah, so maybe 4 years ago now, but this was at my previous job. But one of the books they would select books for us administrators, and one of them was Having Fierce Conversations. They're difficult to have, Yatsa, but
Hmm.
we have to be able to have them and respectfully so that we're protecting ourselves, right? We're protecting, our psychological well-being and things like that, and we're avoiding burnout, because then what happens is then we become demotivated. And as a
Hmm.
behavior consultant, you understand the concept of motivation. Like
Yes.
it's so critical. So really taking care of ourselves. But you also made a good point, is having someone, whether it's a mentor, whether it's an accountability partner, whether it's someone to just chat or whatever,
Yes.
knowing that, at the end of the day, there is this person, that's also really important. And it's critical for us to have, that as professionals, whether again, it's a colleague, it's a mentor, it doesn't really matter. But I think you gave some really good examples of how we avoid burnout, especially in our field where we know it's likely to happen. And then to Yatta, I think of, we have a professional responsibility and an ethical responsibility in our field. So the more we take care of ourselves, the less likely we are to engage in behaviors. Sometimes they are unintentional, Yatta, but because we're in such a high stress state, we may do things and say things that we want the next day, or even the next minute, we're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. So it's so important, as you said, to make sure we're doing that, and we're taking time away from work just for ourselves. I know, on one of the episodes, this was a couple episodes ago, the guest said that she has one day where there's no work, right? It's just her, it's a family, so she makes sure she dedicates one day to where she's not doing any work at all. So thank you for sharing that. So Yatta, to close us out in our wonderful conversation, what are 3 leadership takeaways that you would want listeners, so whether it's up and coming behavior consultants, whether it's colleagues, whatever, whomever, it doesn't really matter. What are 3 leadership takeaways you would want people to walk away from this conversation with?
Definitely lead with clarity. People thrive when expectation and communication are consistent. Another thing is also lead with compassion. Behavior change is hard, for our students, for our adults. Grace goes a long way. Yeah. And lastly, definitely lead with collaboration. Try to work with other people in the field. This is not a field where you can do it by yourself. There are so many team members, and you have to work with each other to make sure that you are delivering the best possible service to the students, the family, the insurance companies as a whole. So definitely, I'll say those 3, they're very important, in our field.
Yeah. I love that. Clarity, compassion, collaboration. Very easy to remember. All the C's.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And as you said, clarity, it made me think of Brene Brown, right? Her book, Dare to Lead. She talked about clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And when you mentioned clarity, it reminded me of that. So being clear is the kindest thing we can do, whether it's being clear in a positive message or whether it's clear in giving, constructive feedback, but being clear about it so that the person knows, as you said, the trust and the honesty and all of that. So it made me think of that. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And you started off with lead with clarity. So thank you for sharing that. So clarity, compassion, collaboration. Yeah. So thank you for all your insight, all the wonderful, lovely nuggets you shared. They were helpful to me. Obviously, I learned from all of these conversations, and then our listeners, would have things that they can take away as well. So I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you joining.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for listening to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. And Yatta, thank you for sharing your experiences on today's episode. As we close, I want to leave you with this reflection. Leadership lives in our daily behavior, in how we listen, how we respond, and how we create space for others to grow. Today, Yatta reminded us that people follow trust before data. She emphasized that listening builds credibility, transparency builds safety, and inclusion builds commitment. She reminded us that progress deserves celebration, the 2-second game, and this small upward trend line. And she grounded us in this truth. Compassionate leadership means normalizing frustration, honoring culture, and supporting teams without judgment. If you have a story about leadership and behavior from your community, share your story with us. If this episode resonated, share it with someone. And check out our companion blog, Behaviorally Speaking, Insights for Changemakers, at esthercbubadaservices.com/blog. For training, coaching, and behavior-based leadership support, visit esthercbubadaservices.com. Until next time, lead with humanity and purpose, practice with compassion and intention, and create meaningful, lasting change. This is Dr. Bob. Stay inspired.